1. Weatherlight. Gerrard's Tale by Michael Ryan. The morning the Minotaur arrived, Gerrard entered the training yard in time to see Torsten, the heavier boy, bat Yavero's blade aside and drive the smaller boy down to the sand on the other end of the yard. Yavero's sword flew from his hand, landing well out of his reach, and Torsten moved over him, between him and his weapon. Both young men were breathing hard under the blazing sun. Torsten's blonde hair was dark with sweat and grime, and Yavero's hands were spotted with sword oil and blisters. Gerrard was silently proud of both of them for practicing while the others slacked off. It was still hours before exercises, yet here they were, devoted to the art of war. He remembered that feeling quite well. "Good move," he called out as he took his heavy set of keys from the belt below his vest and moved to the war chests along the wall. "But do you want to—" "Master!" Yavero cried out in terror. Torsten kicked Yavero once in the head, just above his ear. The sound of his boot heel on the thinner boy's skull made a hollow thwack that carried all the way across the open yard, before slashing down with his sword at his foe's throat. Yavero rolled, and the blade cut sand, nicking his ear and drawing blood. Torsten stepped back, regaining his balance and bringing his sword back to attack position as Yavero struggled to get to his feet. Blood bubbled from his wounded ear. "It's too late. He can't save you," Torsten said, raising his sword again. He glanced across the training yard toward Gerrard. "No one can save—" The keys caught Torsten in the throat like a claw, tearing open the soft spot of flesh beneath his Adam's apple. He staggered backward, one hand to his bleeding wound. "Easy, Torsten," Gerrard called. From nowhere he had produced a longbow, and an arrow was already nocked on string and aimed at Torsten. The arrow's point glittered in the sunlight flooding the training yard. 6 steps back or 6 feet under, whichever you prefer." Torsten looked over at Yavero, then back at the arrow pointed at him. "Don't make me kill you too, Master Gerrard," he rasped. He took his hands away from his throat and looked at the blood on his fingertips. "This is a private fight between Yavero and me." "It's ending publicly," Gerrard said. "With a corpse, if need be. I could kill you twice before you could even get to me, Torsten. You're a good student, but education isn't the same thing as experience. You should be quick enough to catch those keys. Now take 6 steps back." For a moment, Torsten hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. Then he raised his blade and, with a defiant shout, turned on Yavero. Gerrard dropped his aim and let the arrow fly. It took Torsten just behind the left kneecap as his leg bent, driving through the muscle and carrying the arrowhead and shaft out the other side until the fletching caught in the wound. Torsten howled, falling forward. The shaft snapped behind his legs as he went down. He dropped his sword, and as blade knifed into the sand, Yavero grabbed its hilt, raising it triumphantly as he stood over the heavier boy. He looked up in time to see Gerrard knock another arrow. "It'll be the right knee for you," Gerrard said. "Shameful limp and no service in the Benalish army. It'll change your entire future with one easy shot if you don't put that sword down, Yavero." "He was talking to Lord Castan," Yavero protested. "The assassin recruiter, the albino. I saw him together at the bridges this morning." From the ground, where he was already working the arrow out of his leg, Torsten snarled, "You're a corpse!" "I don't care if he is Lord Castan." Gerrard began to move forward, his arrow still at the ready. His dark beard itched from the sweat that ran down his face. "I could be Lord Castan and it wouldn't change this mess you're in. Now put down the sword." Yavero relented, tossing the sword into the sand, stepping back afterward. Gerrard let his breath out slowly. "Great. Now we're all in better shape. I'm armed, and you're not." He put his arrow back in his quiver, then picked up both swords. "Castan try to recruit you, Torsten?" Torsten said nothing, but Gerrard held back and let the silence drag on until it became as hot as the sun above. Finally, Yavero said nervously, "I've heard that some of the others were approached too, not just Torsten." "Lord Castan will sew your eyes open before he kills you," Torsten snapped at him, then looked at Gerrard. "I must see a healer, Master." "You've got it," Gerrard said. He held up Torsten's blade. "Your sword stays, of course. You're out. You tried to kill Yavero. You threatened me, and if I were a gambling man, I bet you took gold from the assassins. It's not what I trained you for, Torsten. It's not what the Benalish military is about. You shamed the nation. You disappointed me." Torsten managed to get his weak leg under him, throwing to the sand the arrow that had struck him. He grimaced as he put weight on the leg and nearly fell. When he found his balance again, he was forced to lean heavily to his right, for the wounded leg refused to carry him. The blood from his throat wound was already drying to a dark red splotch like a birthmark. He glared in fury at Gerrard. "And there's more disappointment in your future. You're not the only instructor in Benalia who can teach a man to fight, you know." Gerrard shrugged. "Not the only one who can teach you to dance either. No one will now." He gestured at Torsten's leg. "You're done being a soldier, if you ever wore one." For a moment, Gerrard thought the young man might come at him. Torsten's lips locked, his hands clenched into fists, and his eyebrows met in a scowl. Then he swallowed, took a deep breath, and said, "But I'm not done being a killer." He limped to the training yard's entrance, never looking back. Gerrard watched him go. When he disappeared into the dark tunnel, Gerrard turned to Havero. The young man seemed to be having a difficult time catching his breath, but the panic was fading fast from his face. "Thank the gods you arrived when you did," he half whispered. "I always heard you're one of the best, Master, but I never thought I would so desperately need you to be." "Being the best usually means proving it." Gerrard walked for his keys, picked them up, turned back to the young man. "For Torsten's sake, I hope you're right about all this, and it looks like you are. But for the Benalish army's sake, I hope you're wrong. We have some things to talk about." Havero nodded. "A few things, Master Gerrard." The two of them retired to Gerrard's chambers below the training yard. The 3 dusty rooms lay in shadows, cluttered with trappings and trinkets from days Gerrard had just begun to remember fondly. He watched Havero move around the main chamber, handling various artifacts and weapons and asking questions. The young man had apparently forgotten the heat of the battle, despite the blood that trickled from his ear to stain his gold earring. Gerrard let him explore. Students never came down here, and Havero's curiosity kept him distanced while Gerrard considered the implications of what had just occurred in the yard. "And what's this?" the young man asked, gesturing to a skin hanging on the wall above a row of shelves. "The hide of a scarmathal," Gerrard answered absently as he sat down behind his disorganized desk. He wondered if Torsten had gone directly to Lord Castan after the fight. "I was traveling with some friends along the coast of Denwa when we ran into him. If you wear the skin, it changes your shape into one so you can pass among the other Scarmathals. Kind of a Scarmathal spy's cloak." Havero nodded, paused as if he might ask something else, then gestured at the pendant around Gerrard's neck. "I've seen you at the pendant before. What is that?" Gerrard held it up and across the desk for him to see. The pendant was shaped like a small hourglass, hung so that it could be upended to run its sands while remaining on the chain. As Havero leaned closer to examine it, Gerrard said, "Last treasure of a life I abandoned." Havero was about to speak again, but Gerrard gestured for him to be silent. This was old soil, heavily tilled, memories of the Weatherlight. Captain Sisay and the Legacy were as untouchable as the gods themselves and nearly as unforgiving. They were part of the time Gerrard couldn't change and hadn't understood at the time anyway. Regretting it only made him relive it. Besides, there were far more important things to discuss than Gerrard's past life as a sailor of the skies. "So, Lord Castan is trying to recruit my soldiers as his bloodletters," he said matter-of-factly. "Never mind that such behavior's treason in Benalia. Surely he knows who he's taunting by even trying. Not exactly known for my diplomatic skills. Every master-at-arms, ranking officer, and infantry judge would raise swords over this if word got out. But Castan is jeopardizing my career with this arrogance. I'm obliged to do something about it, risk my entire life in Benalia. I'll be damned if I learn about a cure after the plague." Havero touched his wounded ear and said, "I guess I should have been thinking the same way, Master. Confronting Torsten was a mistake, and now he has a reason to hate me." "Yeah, you should have come to me with this," Gerrard agreed. "We're taking it over my head to Commander Ulrich. If I can trust him, you can. But he'll still spit poison when I tell him that the assassins are headhunting in the army's ranks." "Yes, sir, I know he will." "You know he's going to want the names of the others, everyone who Lord Castan's tried to recruit. There'll be an investigation. The army has no tolerance for this sort of betrayal. That's why I got into it in the first place, but at least the army will protect you from Torsten and the others, so you won't have to sleep with a dagger under your pillow." Gerrard paused, then asked, "Who else besides Torsten?" He watched Havero's eyes pan nervously across the room, pausing on each individual heirloom, and he knew that the young man had yet another secret, poorly concealed. "If I were a gambling man, I bet you'd been approached," he said softly. Havero swallowed, clearing his throat and keeping his eyes averted, unable or unwilling to meet Gerrard's steady gaze. Yes, Master Gerrard, but not by Lord Caston. Well, then who? There's this mercenary band of siege breakers at the docks, Havero answered. They're just passing through Benalia. I met with their recruiter yesterday, and he told me about their group, where they've been, and what they've been doing, the adventures that happen to mercenaries. Adventure's just another way of saying your day started out badly, Gerrard said. No, you don't understand. Havero turned abruptly from Gerrard's desk, picking up an elaborate rod from the shelf beneath the hide. Gerrard watched while Havero held it up as if his master had never seen it before. Our first day of training, you showed this to us. A weapon is only as good as the hand that wields it, you said. And then you fired it. That was amazing, all that magic coming from this little artifact. We were all impressed by both the rod and the wielder. There's a story behind this, yes? Some insane risk you took to find it, some amazing battle you fought to earn it, and here it is, the treasure that epitomizes that whole adventure. Gerrard grinned. It's called the null rod, Havero. You know why? Because it doesn't do anything. It's all flash. I use it for show. Bad example. Then your pendant. Gerrard's grin faded, and he touched the hourglass absently. He sighed, scratching his thin beard. Your knight material. I know you know that. But you have to see your training through. You want adventure, put Banalish armor on, and it'll come at you tooth and claw. Havero shook his head. So I could fill out battle reports and serve as an honor guard for every Banalish noble with a fat gut but a fatter purse? Sentry duty and parades just don't suit me, Master Gerrard. The army's restrictive to a point of strangulation. It's not service, it's servitude. There's got to be something more with the siege breakers. You'd be making a mistake, Gerrard said. The army's as good as it gets, and I should know. I've been out there. I was a first mate on a ship for years. I traveled all over the world. You know what it got me? Dead friends. Bad dreams. I fought as hard as I could, Havero, and I still ended up right here, in servitude to Benalia. I'm not saying you'll be back, but I'm saying you'll wake up somewhere down the road with blood all over your hands, and you probably won't know whose it is, even if it's your own. Standing rigid, Havero smoothed his dusty tunic and said formally, I'd like to be dismissed, Master. He paused and added, I'm sorry. Gerrard rose from behind his desk. This is it, then, he thought. 2 in one day. All right. I'll dismiss you if that's what you really want. But not without names. I'll protect the army's honor by keeping you in if I have to, but the door's open and your password out is the names of the soldiers Lord Caston approached. Havero took a deep breath and began to speak, just as Gerrard knew he would. Gerrard went directly to Commander Ulrich's quarters after Havero left the training yard, and he made his report about Lord Caston. Ulrich's chambers, even the dark and dusty entranceway where Gerrard waited to get his commander's attention, were immaculate compared to Gerrard's. Ulrich was pure soldier, efficient, strict, orderly. He'd been in the Banalish military for more than 20 years and had been one of the first officers to test Gerrard when he arrived in Benalia after leaving Weatherlight. Gerrard had heard him referred to by some of the knights as the first dog of war, and it suited Ulrich's character. He carried himself more like a mountain man than a soldier, moving through the streets of Benalia Port as if he were stalking prey. He was curt, opinionated, and firm, and when he talked, his thick steel-gray eyebrows drew together so tightly that his eyes vanished beneath them. Gerrard watched those eyebrows furrow as he finished his explanation of the morning's events and the list of the soldiers Lord Caston had approached, according to Havero. This could well be running rampant through the military. Ulrich grunted, rubbing his mustache. He passed Gerrard a bottle of wine he had taken from the cabinet, opened just before Gerrard's arrival, but Gerrard shook his head and put it down on the bare table between them next to his empty glass. It'll bring us down from within. Makes us vulnerable to defectors, spies, all sorts of other elements. Who else knows about this? Just you and I, Gerrard said. At least I hope so. What do you want to do, Commander? We could bring Lord Caston in, put some pressure on him to flush out his contacts. Students who've been approached are all the sharpest swords. Lord Caston's getting access to the training yard or the testing reports. Either way, we have a traitor. Caston's an underground assassin. We'd never find him without being led directly to him. Besides, the traitors could easily have been
Torsten or one of the other students?
Gerrard could tell the commander didn't believe his own words. It would drag some knight out of the secret back alley meetings and would spill blood money from hidden coffers. Only someone in authority could pass reports to the assassins.
Watch your students, the commander
said.
See if you can get a sense for what they've been offered. Come see me immediately if you learn anything new.
And Caston?
I'll personally look into finding Lord Caston,
Alaric answered ominously. Gerrard grinned tightly. What's the saying? Before an assassin learns a murder, he should first learn a suicide? Picking up Gerrard's wine glass, Alaric retrieved the Vesuvian wine bottle and poured. He passed the glass to Gerrard.
No assassins ever put stock in that thought. Here, Borland. Best in the domains.
No thanks, Gerrard said, waving the glass away. My drinking days are long past. Alaric cleared his throat and set Gerrard's declined glass on the table before
him. In truth, boy, those days are about to catch up with you. The past arrived on a flying ship just after dawn this morning. Your past.
Gerrard stared at the dark wine for a long moment. When Alaric shifted uncomfortably in his chair, Gerrard looked up, brushing his dark hair out of his eyes, and as he did so, "Why didn't you tell me this when I first walked in?"
"Because you were wild-eyed about the situation with the assassins,"
Alaric replied.
"Because you didn't want to take the fire out of your belly? You, Gerrard, are the Benalish military. If any other master-at-arms had learned what you learned today, they'd shrugged it off and gone on about their business."
"I believe in the army," Gerrard said quietly.
"Yes, and that's where I want your commitment. But I remember the things you said when you first came on to us and signed on. I remember that some passionate commitment in your voice when you spoke of Weatherlight's captain.
Sisay, was it? Sisay? If I sounded passionate, it was only because I was angry. Sisay'd been keeping secrets from me. People died because of what she alone knew." Alaric said gently,
"And people will die now for what you know. That's the burden of responsibility. Can't just run away from it."
Gerrard crossed his arms defiantly. "You saying that I'll abandon Benalia now because I might be responsible for someone's death?" Alaric got to his feet and drew himself up to his full and impressive height, any semblance of subtlety disappearing as it did so.
"I'm saying that you turned away from Weatherlight crew when the situation became difficult. They've come looking for you, but you have a duty of honor to the present as well as the past now. This matter of the assassin grows within your very ranks. You're going to be pulled in two different directions, and whatever you choose is honorable and dishonorable at the same time."
Gerrard stood as well. "So you waited to tell me about Weatherlight until after I committed myself to the assassin matter?"
"I have a vested interest in keeping you with us,"
Alaric admitted. He picked up Gerrard's wine glass and held it out to him.
"Make no apologies for the things I do in the best interests of Benalia. You want that drink now?"
But Gerrard had already turned and passed into the dark entranceway, banging Commander Alaric's door loudly behind him as he departed. He stormed through the streets of the city-town, dodging through the open-air market to avoid a patrol of guards whose names and handshakes were known to him. Old friends were both the first and last things on his mind right now. He didn't want to talk to any comrades from the army for fear that he would tip his hand about Lord Caston and the assassins, but he also couldn't stop thinking about Sisay and Weatherlight. What did she want? It had been a long time since he'd leveled his accusations at her and walked off the ship, but a stirring in him made him wonder if maybe it had been too long. The old familiar anger clenched in his belly, the things she had known about his past that he didn't, the things she hadn't told him until one of their own lay dying, the high-handed self-righteousness with which she had detailed his destiny to him, lecturing him about responsibility. These all came back to him now. He could still see the disappointment in her eyes. He could see it in the faces of the others, especially Hannah's. A broken heart bled into the eyes. He'd heard, and Hannah was the only one who had cried for him as he left Weatherlight. The Minotaur was waiting for him in the training yard, as Gerrard knew he would be. "You've grown taller, Tahngarth," Gerrard called out casually as he let himself in and crossed the sands to the towering Minotaur who had been Sisay's closest ally. "So when does puberty end for Minotaurs?"
"I've not grown,"
Tahngarth retorted.
"You've shrunk."
Gerrard bent down and picked up Torsten's sword, brushing sand from its oils as he rose. "I bet I'm not the only human who rues the day the gods gave gift of speech to cows." He looked up at the Minotaur. Have I mentioned yet that it's good to see you?
I'm here for a reason,
Tahngarth said gruffly, tossing his dreadlocks back over his broad brown shoulders. A deep breath erupted as a snort, puffing out his great nostrils.
Sisay needs you.
Need can be interpreted a dozen different ways. Gerrard gestured for Tahngarth to follow him. The two of them moved to the south wall of the training yard, the tall Minotaur's shadow stretching well beyond Gerrard's. At the wall, Gerrard knelt and unlocked one of the war chests where he kept the exercise swords. As he fished around inside for the sheath, he said, So which way does Sisay think she needs me now?
She is gone, Gerrard. She's been taken prisoner to another plane. A place called Rath. The one who holds her is Volrath, and he means to kill her if we don't act on her behalf now.
Damn it, Gerrard grunted under his breath. Pulling a battered sheath from the war chest, he pretended to look it over, curled his lip at its condition, put it back, and continued to search. Tahngarth said,
You know that after you bolted, we continued to seek out the pieces of legacy?
Oh? Gerrard pulled another sheath from the chest. Don't you know that hunting for the legacy is the same thing as pinning an archer's target to your forehead? Sooner or later, someone gets killed?
And by Toran's horns, Tahngarth roared, this time it might be Sisay!
Rising, Gerrard faced the Minotaur, glaring up at him. Sisay knew the risks better than anyone. Last time it was fellows who died. That elf was like kin to me, you know. And when Sisay finally admitted that she tricked me into looking for the legacy...
You are the rightful heir to the legacy's power,
Tahngarth interrupted, shouting over Gerrard's protests.
She knew what you would not acknowledge, that your destiny lies in wielding the artifacts of the legacy against all the evils that would destroy the world.
Those same evils wiped out the clan that reared me, Gerrard countered. My adopted father, the sorcerer who trained me, everybody I knew, all for the legacy, a grubby little collection of mismatched artifacts. I walked away from the legacy the first time because it was surrounded by death, and Sisay fooled me into looking for it, for its financial value. The second time, why would I come back to do it now?
Because Sisay needs you, because you walked away from your obligations no matter how noble the reason.
Gerrard sheathed Torsten's longsword. The fit was tight. That doesn't tell me a thing, Tahngarth. I've heard this you owe us argument before. You have to do better than that.
You owe her. She is your past,
Tahngarth said. No! Turning away from the Minotaur, Gerrard hurled the sword at the war chest with surprising force. It banged loudly against the chest's upraised lid, the sound echoing across the large empty training yard. Even the gods can't undo the past. Whatever I owed her was paid in blood. My clan's blood. Rafellos' blood.
You've not changed a day,
Tahngarth charged.
You throw things in a tantrum, but your horns are still as blunt as the day you walked away.
Gerrard said nothing.
It's true that Rafellos died because of your choices,
the Minotaur continued.
He died because you chose to pursue the legacy, your destiny.
That's right, Gerrard said cynically, and I'm not going to risk anyone that way again.
And Sisay will die because of what you choose to do now. You will always find reasons for doing or for not doing. The reason for doing this,
Tahngarth paused, his throat stiff as he raised his head higher,
is because we need you as well. Hannah has reviewed the pieces of the legacy we've collected and says you may be our only hope of using them to reach Sisay in Rath. Do not let her die too. You could not save her, fellows, but you are Sisay's only hope.
At the mention of Hannah's name, Gerrard felt himself soften. He remembered all the time she had spent handling the artifacts as each new piece came aboard, her eyes alive with anticipation as the two of them uncrated some recently acquired relic. And he remembered sitting down with her and his friend, Sisay, before the bad times, the three of them sharing wine and discussing the myriad of implications of each artifact's power. Sisay had been his confidant. They had shared moments that none of the others would ever know about, but that he would rather die himself than lose. He sighed. You know this is a trick, don't you, Tahngarth? Whoever took Sisay's probably counting on you to drag me kicking and screaming back aboard Weatherlight. You're going to put your hoof right in that trap.
And we will all put our hooves in the same trap, and we all walk with the same limp.
Gerrard considered for a moment. I have a situation here in Dominaria. Demands my involvement, too. I can't do both.
Need overrules choices,
Tahngarth said simply.
Sisay needs you.
The afternoon exercises were a blur. Gerrard offered a terse and unconvincing story about the absence of both Havero and Torsten, then let the other students leave early. He considered taking aside those he knew had been approached by Lord Caston, but he was unsure of what to say. What price treason? A soldier's allegiance is to Dominaria, and if it's not, why stain its army with your presence? Where does responsibility to oneself end and responsibility to others begin? But that, he knew, was the real question, and he didn't want to ask a question to which he didn't already know the answer. At sunset, he raked the sand, double-checked the war chest locks, and sat in the shadows as the light ran away from the training yard. He turned his hourglass pendant over to watch the sands trickle from the top to bottom. Once, when he was younger, he had thought it novel to count the number of enemies he'd killed. In the middle of the battle, the significance of surviving could easily be overshadowed by the excitement of killing. At first, when there were a few, Gerrard remembered every one of them, their last looks of surprise or pain before he sent them to whatever followed life. He became uneasy with the realization that they were people. After all this time, he could still see their faces, hear their cries for mercy. It was too late for any of them, but Sisay's was a cry for help he could still answer. Well after dark, he locked up the training yard and went below to his quarters. The lantern in his entranceway had gone out, and he paused to light it. Fumbling for a moment with his flint in the blackness, "I've brought you a present, Master Gerrard," a voice snarled from the darkness as the flint struck. Gerrard turned slowly, the lantern's light rising behind him. His shadow jumped across the entrance walls and into the main quarters where Torsten stood, his throat bandaged with a black circle of cloth, a dagger in one hand. In the other, he held a bloody head by the hair. As the lantern's light reached the skull and the shadows fell away, Gerrard could see the earring, speckled, still with blood, of Havero. His bulging eyes had been sewn open, frozen in a stare. The stitches through the eyelids looked like small spiders lined across the dead boy's face. Gerrard met Torsten's stare coldly, swallowing his rage. Torsten pointed the tip of his dagger at Gerrard's chest. "He was alive when I did it," Torsten said arrogantly. "But I'll spare you that indignity." He tossed Havero's head to Gerrard's feet.
"You've got the ball bearings of a brass man," Gerrard answered.
His sword was sheathed, but there were weapons all around the chamber. Swords, axes, polearms. He only needed a moment to reach one.
"I'm a master at arms, Torsten. You show up here with a dagger. Why don't you come blindfolded, too?"
Waving the dagger, Torsten advanced.
"I've been training with assassins, Master Gerrard," he said. "And assassins only need a dagger when they have poison."
He slashed with the dagger, aiming at Gerrard's middle. Gerrard backpedaled, throwing the lantern for effect and watching for his opening. As Torsten dodged left to avoid the lantern, Gerrard dove right, narrowly missing Torsten's backhand cut as Gerrard rolled into the main chamber of his quarters. He knew better than to come to his feet. Instead, he lunged forward under the table, reaching up under it as he did so to find the dagger he kept secured there. Behind him, Torsten grunted as he swung, cutting to where Gerrard's throat would have been had he stood still. Gerrard tipped the table as he rose, shoving it hard toward Torsten, who jumped back. In the entranceway, oil splattered when the lantern broke and ignited the curtain that served as door. The room began to heat quickly.
"You might as well be blindfolded,"
Gerrard said, displaying his own dagger.
"because now we're even."
Torsten raised his weapon again. Gerrard flipped his dagger end for end, caught it by the blade, and threw it at Torsten's sword hand. The knife rolled sideways in flint, then buried itself in the back of Torsten's hand from knuckle to knuckle, instead of from knuckle to wrist. Torsten wailed with surprise and pain as the blade drove through his palm. His own dagger flew from his grip. Instinctively, he reached to catch it with his uninjured hand. The blade sliced neatly across his palm as his hand closed around it. Realization set in as he met Gerrard's knowing gaze.
"Good catch,"
Gerrard said. Torsten began to tremble, dropping the poisoned dagger and looking wildly around the room. He teetered as if he might fall, shook his head as if to clear it, then scratched absently at the bandages covering his throat wound. Taking a step further into the room, he snatched the elaborate rod from the nearest shelf. He pointed it at Gerrard.
"I remember this,"
he said thickly, licking his lips, eyelids fluttering erratically. "From the first day of training. Powerful magic."
"It's only as good as the hand that wields it," Gerrard said.
"Yes."
Torsten seemed to drift away for a moment, swaying on his feet again.
"And I'm good."
"No,"
Gerrard answered.
"You're dead."
"Maybe, but I'll take you with me."
Torsten pointed the rod and twisted the grip. A magnificent blast of yellow light exploded from its core, roaring out of the barrel, enveloping Gerrard. The quarters around them were momentarily bright as day. The rod hummed loudly as it unloaded its magic onto the room. Just as suddenly, the magic went away, leaving the two men standing in the dimness of the chamber as they were before. Gerrard smiled. "I bet you wish you had gone for a real weapon," he said. Torsten groaned, dropped the null rod, and sank to the floor. His knees drew up to his chin, and he wrapped his arms around them. Gerrard kicked the poisoned dagger away before he knelt next to him. The young man's breathing was quickly becoming ragged. Angry red blotches were already spreading over both of his cheeks.
"Where's Lord Caston, Torsten?" Gerrard asked. "You know where he hides, where I can find him."
Nodding, Torsten stared up at the ceiling. His eyelids had stopped fluttering. Now he stared as blankly as the eyes in Havero's decapitated head.
I don't want to die alone.
"I'll stay with you until you pass," Gerrard said softly.
"But before you go,
Tell me where Lord Caston is hiding." Commander Ulrich tore a strip of bread from the loaf and passed it across the table to the albino, who accepted it with a gracious but awkward nod. The albino's long white hair whispered over his shoulders as he moved. Despite the late-night shadows dancing all around Ulrich's quarters, the albino seemed to shine, as if the feeble light from the lantern set him aglow.
"No tasters tonight?"
Lord Caston sighed, smiling. He sniffed the bread.
"I come ill-prepared."
"You'll notice I'm not serving the Suven wine,"
Ulrich said, sharing his guest's smile.
"Seem to have mislaid my only bottle. Oh, now I remember. It isn't Borlean. It's Vesevan."
"Just as well. I've been told it goes down rough. Like poison."
Caston's smile faded.
"Do you think he knew?"
Ulrich shook his head and smoothed his gray mustache.
"He was upset about this Weatherlight matter. Simply too distracted to drink."
Rubbing his fingers as if they were cold, Caston said,
"Better, perhaps, if you had encouraged him to rejoin the ship. Save us this bloody business."
And he would remain a wild card. He could return at any given moment to raise rebellion against the officers. And he would, too. He's thick with the knights. They marched against us, for certain. There'd be civil war in Benalia.
Alaric bit off a mouthful of bread, chewed slowly, swallowed.
"It's better this way, provided your boy's up to the job."
"It's not the boy who needs to work, just his dagger," Caston answered. "With a touch of stealth, we'll get poison to Gerrard's heart. One way or another."
Gerrard stepped out of the darkness of the entranceway and into the lamplight. Alaric choked on his bread. Leaping quickly to his feet, he dashed around the table to stand between Gerrard and his albino assassin.
"Didn't want to disturb your conversation, Commander," Gerrard said tightly. "Glad I waited."
Alaric put his hand on his sword.
"This is an unfortunate surprise,"
Alaric admitted. Behind him, Lord Caston rose quietly, turning to face Gerrard.
"This would seem to be a day for them," Gerrard agreed. "I was seriously considering staying. I figured the Benalish army couldn't be corrupted as long as we were vigilant. But that was before you sent Torsten after me."
Alaric darted to look at Lord Caston, the commander's eyebrows knitting in annoyance.
"Never sent an assassin to do a soldier's work, eh? In your command."
"What's the difference?" Gerrard snapped. His hand dropped to his sword hilt as Alaric reached for his own blade. "Perhaps," Lord Caston said, his voice barely rising above a whisper as the two men went for their weapons, "the time has come for a bargain." Gerrard stopped, as did Alaric. "A command position of your own," the albino suggested. He looked to Alaric for support, who nodded curtly. "You work closely with the soldiers. Even without reports, you know who has talent."
"There's always gold,"
Alaric added. "How much gold?" Gerrard asked. He moved into the room, putting the table between them. He stopped near Alaric's cabinets.
"Name a figure,"
Alaric said. "There are conditions." Lord Caston began to speak, but Alaric cut him off.
"Then name them. You have us by the sword buckle. What do you want?"
"First, no more assassins are recruited from my ranks. I don't care what the other masters at arms do, but nobody gets drafted out from under me." Gerrard waited for both men to nod before continuing. "Second, you clean house among the officers. Lord Caston recruits from without, not from within." Caston grimaced, but Alaric said,
"It'll be difficult, but if it buys your silence, and so be it."
"Well then," Gerrard said, opening the cabinet and reaching inside.
That just leaves one more thing. Let's drink to our newfound alliance.
He put the bottle of Vesuvian wine and 2 glasses on the table.
After you, gentlemen, he said, grinning. Should I be thinking of a toast or maybe an epitaph? Should have known you would have done this the hard way, Alaric said, drawing his sword. You're a bastard, Gerrard, and a stupid one at that. We're 2 against 1. I've no doubt you can take one of us, but the other will gut you.
Gerrard drew his own blade. I brought a guest. The Minotaur had to bend to get through the door, but he rose to his full height once within the main chamber. He hefted his own 2 blades expertly, crossing them. Tahngarth snarled something in the language of the tall-room Minotaurs, and his lips frothed with his fury. Gerrard gestured at Lord Castan.
If he moves, cut him down. The knights should be here any time now. They'll deal with him if he's still alive.
The albino stared up at Tahngarth, taking in the Minotaur's broad, muscular chest and furious stare, then quietly sat down at the table.
You summon the knights?
Alaric asked. Gerrard nodded. When Torsten told me where to find Lord Castan, thought it might be a good idea to make sure he ended up in the proper hands. In mine, he'd probably end up dead. Alaric turned his sword over in his hands, glaring at Gerrard while he did.
You've killed me, boy. When the knights arrive, my career ends. 22 years in the Benomish military, ground under your boot.
Your own boot, I would say, Gerrard mused. You're my friend once, though, Commander, so here. He slid the bottle of Vesuvian wine toward Alaric. I'll say it was Lord Castan's doing. You'll die with some semblance of honor. Alaric stared at him, then down again at his sword.
If I fight my way out,
they'll still figure out what you've done, Gerrard finished. He pointed at Tahngarth. You have only his silence if I'm alive. Cutting your way out of this won't save you unless you think you can kill both of us. I'd bet on us, if I were a gambling man. Slowly, Alaric put his sword down on the table. Reaching for one of the glasses with a firm hand, he then poured the dark Vesuvian wine into the glass. Before you practice murder, Gerrard said as Alaric lifted the glass to his lips, you should first learn of suicide. Commander Alaric nodded.
A hard lesson learned, boy.
He drank quickly. They had gathered for Captain Gerrard on Weatherlight's deck, 30 sailors strong in the morning's first light. Tahngarth introduced him to those who had joined since his departure, many of whom had already heard of his exploits. Gerrard accepted their compliments as well as their uncomfortable stares. For every one of them who thought him a hero, he knew there was one who had thought him a coward. It was entirely up to him to change their minds. At the end of the line, he bent to greet Squee, the goblin cabin boy who had been so enamored of Sisay when he first came aboard. The goblin shook his hand awkwardly, then hid nervously behind Tahngarth's knees. Gerrard looked up into the Minotaur's unreadable eyes. "You first mate, Tahngarth," he said.
"Again?" Tahngarth snorted. "I was a first mate. For the captain's record, I was captain from Sisay's abduction until this moment."
Gerrard grinned. 2 steps up, 1 step back. Don't feel too alone. You and I'll both get demoted when we get Sisay back. The Minotaur bowed his head for a moment, closing his eyes as if in prayer. He let out a great breath through his nostrils, shaking his nose ring.
"I've been afraid to say when."
"I'll tell her you said so," Gerrard said, moving on. "When she comes up that gangplank." Finally, he came to the last crew member. The 2 stood uncomfortably facing one another while Tahngarth and the others drifted to their stations to prepare for sailing. Hannah smoothed her blonde hair behind each ear, adjusted the various tools on her work belt, and shuffled her feet once. She's still beautiful, Gerrard thought. He looked out at the sails, let his eyes follow the goblin across the deck, and listened to the sounds of port life drifting to the ship from Benalia. Finally, he said, "I missed you, Hannah." She half smiled, then caught herself and straightened her expression. "Welcome back aboard." "Thanks." He paused, wondering what he could say that would change things. Instead, he said, "Tahngarth tells me I'm going to need a wizard to get to Rath?" When she nodded, he added, "He also tells me you know someone who can help us?" "In Talaria," she said. "I can navigate us there." "So why did you decide to come back, Gerrard?" she suddenly blurted. "Let's face it, you've been running away from the legacy since the day you first learned of it. Never really meant anything to you, did it?" "You're right. It doesn't mean a thing to me," Gerrard said softly. "If it gets me what I want, or what I know is right, I'll use it. But if it doesn't, I'll forget about it. We can just toss it over the side when we reach Rath. I'm back for you, for Tangarth, and the rest of the crew. Most important, I'm back for Sisay. Well, Hannah said, bemused. She cocked her head as Tangarth shouted her name from the foredeck. Benalia made an adult out of you despite yourself, I see.
There's a bloody battle,
Gerrard said, grinning. One of us had to lose. The anchor beckons, Captain. As she turned away, Hannah gestured to the necklace dangling from his throat and the object at the end of the chain. What happened to the hourglass he used to wear? Gerard's grin faded. He held up the blood-flecked gold earring, looking at Hannah through its circle. I'm leaving it behind, he said solemnly. This is just about as valuable, I think. The ship set sail for Dominaria. Here ends the tale of Gerrard. A dark room. The master stretched, shook himself. Talking for a long time tired him more than he remembered. With almost a start, he realized how old he was. How much longer did he have left? A few years? A few months? Perhaps less. At his feet, Ilcaster sat, staring at the master with shining eyes. The boy did not seem tired at all, the librarian noted, and his face no longer seemed frightened and sorrowful. The shadows in the room were still thick, pregnant with menace, and the storm raged outside, but within the little yellow circle of candlelight, all seemed safe. Perhaps this was the way to conquer fear, the old man reflected, to take refuge in stories of brave deeds from another age. Perhaps, he thought, this is why we still tell ourselves these stories, even if we no longer entirely believe them, because they are a reminder to us that memory goes on even longer after we're dead. Did they have an easy time finding Dominaria? Ilcaster's question broke in abruptly upon the librarian's thoughts.
Hardly that,
the master shook his head sadly.
Nothing about their voyage was easy, and throughout all their troubles they remembered Sisay in the clutches of Volrath, and could only imagine what tortures she might be suffering. Their first stop, though, was not in Dominaria, but in Llanowar.
I remember Llanowar, the boy said eagerly. That's where, what's her name was from? The master looked at him blankly. You know, the cat person.
Ah, yes, Miri. She was not, in fact, from Llanowar, but Miri had gone there after she and Gerrard parted, but now Weatherlight's captain needed the help of an old friend.
How did he persuade her to come with him?
With difficulty. During the journey, Gerrard settled somewhat uncomfortably into Sisay's cabin. He used the time to examine the journal of his former captain and shipmate, and as well as the Thran tome which he received from Hannah. From these documents, he realized for the first time the importance of Weatherlight. He also discovered a spell that could overcome the effects of the touchstone, a device used to immobilize Karn, though the value of this was not immediately clear to him. Gerrard wandered around the ship, renewing his acquaintances with its features. Making his way through the hold, he saw pieces of the legacy Sisay had collected in the time after he had left Weatherlight. Then, to his utter amazement, he came upon a silent, motionless figure standing upright, shining in the dim light. Karn. Using the spell from the Thran tome, Gerrard reactivated his old friend and guardian. Though Karn had stood motionless for years, his mind had frozen at the precise moment of his deactivation. He was in anguish at the thought of having been responsible for the death of an innocent. Brokenly, he told Gerrard of his resolution to never again take a life.
Just a minute, interrupted the boy, skepticism in his tone. You mean Karn would never take a life, even if somebody was threatening to destroy him? The librarian nodded. What about if someone was threatening to kill Gerrard?
Good question, boy. Glad you're paying attention. Point of fact, it was the very question Gerrard himself asked. The golem thought long and hard, but in the end he replied that his decision was absolute. Even Gerrard's fate could not overcome his choice. He would never knowingly take a life, not merely a human life, but the life of any creature.
Ilcaster considered, chin in hand. I think that was a mistake, he said at last. I mean, I don't think he should have gone around killing people, but everybody has to defend themselves if they're being attacked. The master shrugged. It was, nonetheless, his decision. And Gerrard was so overjoyed to see the golem that he did not, perhaps, fully understand what a profound change had come over his old protector. He greeted him joyfully and introduced him to the rest of the crew. And all this time, while Gerrard renewed his friendship with the silver golem, his familiarity with the flying ship, Weatherlight steadily drew closer to Llanowar.